This is the story of a man who spent 5 years full of anger toward his twin brother for disappearing when their mom got really sick and never coming back. Not even after she passed away. But one day, some unexpected news changed everything, showing him a truth that turned his anger into something else. Now, he has only one goal: to get revenge on everyone who made his brother suffer. This is the story of a man who became a demon to get his revenge. The story begins with our protagonist, Yeon, looking at a photo of someone who looks exactly like him. As he stares at it, he remembers that the first news he heard about this person in 5 years was about his death. This takes us 3 years back to his mother's funeral. During the flashback, we learn that she was gravely ill and that the man in the photo was his twin brother, who had disappeared without a trace. Despite her illness, their mother never stopped searching for him. Yeon tells us that after his mother passed away, he also gave up looking for his brother and decided to take on a mission that sent him to Africa, thinking he had no reason to return to Korea. Back in the present, we see Yeon holding a box containing some of his brother's belongings, a photo and a pocket watch. As he looks at the watch, he remembers it was a gift he gave his brother to wish him good luck when he got into college. At that moment, we see a flashback of the two of them sitting on a couch, sharing a peaceful and happy moment. Suddenly, the watch starts moving. Yeon, surprised, thinks it was broken and doesn't understand how it's working. Then, he hears a voice coming from the watch. At first, he thinks it's just his imagination or some hidden mechanism, but soon he realizes it's neither. The voice belongs to his brother, who starts explaining what happened. His brother tells him that after he disappeared, he tried to find medicine to cure their mother but couldn't make it back home. One day, he received a strange text message asking if he wanted to participate in something. Confused, he replied yes. From that day on, he started having strange dreams, as if he were in a fantasy world filled with creatures like spirits, orcs, trolls, and dragons. At the center of that world stood the Tower of the Sun God. According to rumors, anyone who managed to conquer the tower would become a god. But his brother wasn't interested in divine power. He was after the magical medicine that could cure any illness, hidden somewhere in the tower. Over time, his brother formed a team with people who shared the same goals, and together they started climbing the tower in search of that miraculous cure. The story continues with the protagonist's brother narrating the events that followed his decision to climb the Tower of the Sun God. Alongside his team, they set out to conquer it, but the journey proved far more difficult than anticipated. Eventually, they encountered a high-ranking clan that stood in their way. They tried to negotiate peace, but the talks broke down, sparking a violent war. As the conflict unfolded, the brother recounts how they lost an allied clan and how, amidst the chaos, he found someone who loved him in that world. Things took a darker turn when they discovered a traitor within their ranks. Paranoia spread, and trust shattered. In his journal, the brother revealed how his body began to fail him, worn down by injuries, exhaustion, and the toll of battle. The final blow came when the woman he loved betrayed him, stabbing him in the heart before abandoning him. In a desperate moment, he managed to secure the elixir, the miracle cure they had sought all along. But with enemies closing in, he couldn't deliver it. Realizing his time was running out, he left a series of messages for his younger brother, detailing the situation and entrusting him with the mission to recover the elixir and save their mother. The narration abruptly ends as a status window appears with the message, "Succession initiated." The protagonist feels a rush of mana flowing through his body, signaling the awakening of his powers. Flashbacks of his brother's memories overwhelm him, and when they subside, he discovers he has inherited his brother's abilities. Among them, a cold-blooded nature that grants him unshakable logic, enhanced perception to see the truth, and the ability to hear his brother's memories recorded in a special watch. Determined to carry on his brother's mission and seek vengeance, the protagonist begins preparing for his journey. He sells his home, burns his military gear, and equips himself with supplies, knives, and first aid kits. Finally, he activates the watch, opening a portal to the tower. As he steps through, a new title appears before him, the Demon Musket. The protagonist's trial begins on the tower's ground floor, where the tutorial unfolds. This is a test designed to determine who is worthy of ascending the tower and becoming a god. The tower's administrator appears suddenly and explains that the test consists of 7 blocks, from A to G, with better rewards for higher scores. Players are given 30 days to complete the tutorial and are advised to form groups of 3 to 5. However, the rewards are greater for those who attempted solo, though the risks are exponentially higher. He faces deadly traps, using his brother's warnings and his own instincts to avoid the first arrows. Still, he's hit by some, but thanks to his military experience, he started to heal, and his resistance to pain improved, along with his burns. Earlier, he noticed that the arrows were launched with a specific timing, preceded by a signal. He had to pinpoint that signal since it was too dark to see clearly. His senses were improving by 1%, and when he heard the gears moving, he threw his knife and successfully disabled the first trap. He continued dodging arrows and made an interesting discovery: how he interacted with the arrows could boost his stats. Dodging a blue arrow from the side increased his agility, blocking a red arrow improved his strength, and taking a hit from a yellow arrow boosted his endurance. This was a bonus stage where he could level up his stats, though his MP couldn't be increased. The system admin, intrigued by his progress, decided to observe him more closely. The protagonist was thrilled because his skills had grown significantly in just 34 hours. Eventually, he made it to a safe zone. However, before moving to the next area, his bones and injuries were healed. Exhausted, he collapsed unconscious as soon as he entered. After a while, Yeon-woo opened his eyes and saw someone standing in front of him. So he guessed it was a mysterious merchant. The merchant introduced himself as A and told him that he could buy all sorts of things, like skill books, potion books, food, and even different types of artifacts. Something caught Yeon-woo's eye: a reset ticket. With it, he could return to a specific point in time, but he'd have to pay using his stats. Yeon-woo also noticed a bottle of mineral water for 2 points of strength and thought it was a huge ripoff. The young man asked to buy the reset ticket, but the merchant didn't understand why, since no one had ever used it before. Yet he sold it to him. All Yeon-woo had to do was break it, and it would take him to the starting area. Yeon-woo bought a total of 10 reset tickets using all of his stats, leaving him with no strength, agility, or other attributes. But he was ready to grind everything back again, and his skill points started growing, along with some new abilities like visual projection, which allowed him to see the entire surrounding area in colorless form. His brother had advised him to make the most of it. He reached the final point once again. It had taken him 34 hours before, but now it only took him 4 hours. He had leveled up quite a bit, but the top players were probably already in Block E. However, it was time to start his real journey. He entered the Block A boss room, and as soon as he stepped in, fire arrows appeared, and traps triggered. But thanks to his stats and reflexes, Yeon-woo managed to survive. Out of nowhere, Yeon saw a huge flame blocking his path. He swung his knife and, with a single swipe, created a way through it. He quickly ran through, gaining resistance to burns and improving his sense-sharpening skills along the way. After escaping the fire, a log flew at him. At first, he didn't notice it and almost got hit, but at the last second, he managed to dodge. But then, he was punched in the stomach, which hurt. Yeon was thrown backward, and as he looked at the person who hit him, he realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a brass scarecrow that mimicked a player's movements and actions, and it could attack within a certain range. Yeon remembered his brother mentioning these monsters. He recalled that if someone stands in front of 3 of them, they could copy the player's skills and use them with greater power. If a person defeats it, they gain access to the boss room. Yeon grabbed his knife, ready to fight, knowing there were only 2 ways to defeat this creature. The first way was to destroy its forehead directly, and the second was to stab it. Activating his Dragon Eye skill, Yeon saw that his opponent was completely featureless, with just an outline showing. Thanks to the ability, he noticed a black clot in the scarecrow's chest, its weak point. As the scarecrow swung another punch, Yeon began to defend himself. Just then, someone yelled at him, telling him the scarecrow moved based on sensors, so he needed to find and destroy them. Yeon dodged the monster's attack and realized the guy who yelled at him looked like the guy he noticed when his sense enhancement was activated. He stabbed through the black mass and the scarecrow exploded from the impact. The guy watching in shock couldn't believe it. Yeon locked eyes with him, which really freaked the kid out. As Yeon walked toward him, he thought about how hard it had been to figure out the monster used sensors to enhance its skills, something most players wouldn't even understand. The kid was now visibly intimidated, with Yeon standing over him, towering 2 heads taller. The guy asked Yeon what he planned to do with him, but Yeon noticed how weak the kid seemed. They stood facing each other, then asked how he knew the copper doll worked with sensors. The guy got a bit more relaxed but confused, not knowing how to respond. The entire doll was covered in a blue aura, and the kid explained he could see the magic thread around the copper doll. At that moment, Yeon realized the kid could see magic. Yeon continued to watch him and said that how he could see and control magic was exactly what interested him. He would be grateful if the kid could teach him how to do it. He told the guy he wasn't asking for help for free and offered to help him get out of there in return. The kid hesitated. Yeon turned to leave, saying he wasn't going to force him, but the kid quickly stopped him, calling out and asking if it was really true that Yeon couldn't control magic. Yeon replied that he had no reason to lie. The boy then pointed at the copper doll and shouted that it didn't make sense. He couldn't believe that someone without magic control could defeat the doll. They both looked at the copper doll, and the boy thought about how, under normal circumstances, no amount of physical skills or enhancements could even leave a scratch on it. Yet Yeon had managed to defeat it in just a few hits, without using magic at all. In the end, the kid agreed to help. He introduced himself as Yul. As they started walking, Yeon mentioned that he'd opened the path for both of them. Then he turned to Yul, activating his Dragon Eye skill, and said he had a question. Yul began to look nervous. Yeon asked why he was using his current shell. Staring at him closely, Yeon added that his appearance was just a disguise, and there was another layer underneath. From what Yeon could see, Yul's real body looked like that of a 10-year-old, which made it clear he wasn't an ordinary person. While they were fighting, Yeon moved quickly, taking down the copper dolls one by one. He jumped at another, slashed with his knife, and stabbed it right into the black core. Nearby, Yul stood frozen, his face showing complete shock. Yeon said that they were almost at Block B, and also he told Yul that it was time to keep his part of the deal since they were nearly there. As they walked ahead, Yul admitted he wasn't sure how Yeon would react to him being able to see mana flows since birth. Yeon looked ahead and figured that his ability might be something passed down through his genes. He knew it was rare, but there were cases where unique and special abilities were inherited. Yeon quickly realized his situation was similar to Yul's, which reminded Yeon of his brother's skill called Perfect Adaptation, compatible with everything, including mana. Jeong-woo, unlike regular people, didn't struggle with mana. They said his brother was the only one chosen by the ancient dragon, Kalidas. Thanks to his unique gift and his ability to communicate with anything. Yul started talking about mana, explaining that some people are considered geniuses when it comes to using it. He told Yeon to imagine mana as a river and magic as the water flowing from a hill or reservoir through that river. While Yul was talking, Yeon's thoughts drifted as notifications popped up in front of him. They said he had cleared Block as solo and earned something that most people found really hard to get, an additional 500 karma points. Yeon opened a door. Behind the door, a bright light greeted him. The notifications then announced he had entered Block B. It was a massive room filled with players. As Yeon stepped in, people turned to look at him, confused. They were curious about the mask he was wearing and shocked that he had managed to clear Block as solo, especially since the tutorial had started a week ago and most players had already moved on. Yeon glanced at Yul and asked if he was ready to continue. Yul, looking at his hands, he smiled and said, "I finally made it out." Yul noticed someone staring at him. It was a group of guys who looked at him with disgust. Yul shot them an angry look. Seeing Yul so upset, Yeon asked who they were. Yul said they used to be his team, but he wasn't dealing with them anymore. They both sat down and started talking. Yeon was surprised by how much Yul knew about magic. It was hard for him to fully grasp, but he managed to get the general idea of how magic and mana worked. Yeon said he had a basic understanding now but asked how to start controlling magic. Yul admitted he didn't really know how to explain it since he had always been able to control it from the start. Yeon sighed, saying it was unfortunate but there wasn't much to do about it. As Yeon got up to leave, Yul's former team approached him, and Yeon overheard them calling out. A flashback revealed that a popular player named Arangdan had introduced himself to Yul's team earlier. He told them he'd wait for them in the Block B waiting room. If they made it and wanted to keep playing, they could join his team. The scene shifted back to Block B, where the squad was struggling against copper dolls. One of the guys yelled that it was impossible to beat the dolls, and the blonde-haired boy froze, realizing they were in serious trouble. If things didn't change, they wouldn't just fail to finish the tutorial, they wouldn't make it out alive. Suddenly, the blonde-haired guy glanced to the side and saw Yul. He thought Yul's ability wasn't very useful, especially since he was always hanging back. Frustrated, he grabbed Yul by the collar and shoved him into the middle of the fight with the copper dolls. After that, the blonde-haired guy shouted at the rest of the team to run away, leaving Yul behind. The story returned to the Block B room, where Yul's former teammates approached him. They demanded to know how he had managed to survive. Yul, visibly annoyed, told them it wasn't their business. With an angry expression, he added that he didn't care what they wanted but warned them to leave him alone. Their leader, the blonde-haired guy, unexpectedly, he bowed and apologized. Yul, surprised and confused, stared at him as the blonde-haired guy explained that he was willing to do anything to make up for what had happened. However, he begged Yul not to tell anyone about it. Yul, still confused, asked what he was even talking about. The blonde-haired guy hesitated, admitting that explaining everything in detail would be too complicated. The rest of the group joined in, bowing and pleading with Yul not to say anything. Overwhelmed and frustrated, Yul turned away from them. As Yul walked away, the blonde-haired guy froze. He regretted letting things end like this because he had told Bill that Yul sacrificed himself for the team. This thought made him angrier by the second. He told himself that while betraying Yul the first time had been hard, doing it again wouldn't be as difficult. As he got closer, the blonde-haired guy reached for his sword, thinking no one would question what happened to Yul. Just as he was about to draw his sword, Yeon appeared behind him. Yeon spoke calmly, saying that the Arangdan group was connected to Blue Flower Island, a place known for its proud and picky recruits. Before the blonde-haired guy could react, Yeon quickly cut off his arm. He screamed in pain as blood poured from the wound. Yul, hearing the noise, turned around and saw Yeon fighting the rest of the group by himself. Meanwhile, the blonde-haired guy lay on the ground, crying and screaming. Yeon watched the group and thought he could have just gone to Block B. But after learning that Yul was betrayed, he couldn't ignore it. He closed his eyes, reminded of his own brother, who had been stabbed in the back by his allies. The two men, holding their swords, were terrified. The blonde guy cursed him through his pain, drawing his sword to attack. Yeon grabbed his arm and twisted it, coldly promising to turn him into an invalid. The rest of the team shouted, asking why Yeon was interfering. He calmly replied he was just doing what he wanted, like them. And Yeon ordered them to drop their weapons. After a moment of hesitation, they obeyed, dropping their swords. They begged Yeon to let Keen go, but Yeon smiled under his mask. He pinned Keen to the floor, breaking his arm and watching as the blonde guy screamed, then passed out. The others expressed disagreement, but Yeon wasn't interested in negotiating. He slapped one across the face so hard the guy flew backward, bloodied and unconscious. The remaining men, angry, drew their swords and charged. Yeon ran toward them, slashing their legs. Blood splattered on his knife as they screamed. Yeon then knocked them out with a couple of quick punches. Yul watched, stunned, as Yeon easily took them down. He had known Yeon was strong, but not this strong. Yeon approached Yul, noticing his surprised expression and wiping away some drool. He wished Yul luck and advised him to be more cautious when choosing allies. Yul, stunned, couldn't respond, but as Yeon walked away, he shouted his thanks, vowing to become strong like him someday. Yeon turned briefly, telling Yul to visit the flower garden in Prisia, saying it would be helpful, then continued on. Yul, fists clenched, wondered about the flower garden with newfound determination. Nearby, a red-haired man with tattered clothes watched Yeon's fight, grinning. He woke his sleeping friend, urging him to see what had happened. The boy yawned and complained about being disturbed. The red-haired man explained how the arrogant group, boasting about joining Arangdan, had just been humiliated. The boy stretched and dismissed them, saying their arrogance doomed them. The red-haired man marveled at Yeon's ability to defeat the group alone, noting it likely meant he cleared Block A as a solo player. The boy, now alert, was shocked. The sleeping guy asked if the man really beat Arangdan candidates, warning that those in blue and white might seek revenge. The red-haired man chuckled, dismissing the candidates as insignificant. He mused about recruiting the lone player, noting his uniqueness since he had no allies. The sleeping guy hesitated, rubbing his chin, and warned that involving the player could attract unwanted attention from the blue and white faction. Laughing, the red-haired man teased him for suddenly worrying about such things. The sleeping guy giggled back but declined to join, calling him con and asking to drop the idea. Ignoring him, the red-haired man stood, smiling brightly, and declared his intent to check out the lone player, leaving his friend shaking his head and muttering about his recklessness. 2 notifications announced the start of Block B, with 4 doors to choose from. Yeon stood before them, realizing their order reflected difficulty, the farther right, the harder. His brother had once chosen the blue door, the second from the left. However, his brother later regretted it, as the quality of rewards in Block B depended heavily on the door's color. Learning from this, Yeon confidently chose the black door, seeking Batory's vampiric dagger. Opening the door, Yeon found himself in a room with a deadly pond. The water, unnaturally dense, had formed when the giant Mimaru suddenly died while carrying it. Testing the water with a rock, Yeon watched it disintegrate instantly, confirming its lethality. Activating his dragon vision, Yeon discovered a hidden passage called the Room of Ice and Fire, earning 300 credits. Descending the dark stairway, he found white moss, a rare plant containing the moon spirit. Though a miracle drug for animals, it caused stomach aches in humans and was generally avoided. Yeon, however, saw it as a crucial tool for overcoming the Black Path's challenges. As Yeon reflected, a massive red centipede crept behind him. Yeon, aware of his own physical fragility, realized that stronger muscles and a resilient body were key to survival. Sensing the threat, he quickly grabbed his knife, turned, and threw it. The knife hit the centipede's heart perfectly. With the moss and the creature's heart nearby, Yeon had everything he needed to prepare the miracle drug. Suddenly, a red centipede attacked him. Yeon initially ran but decided to fight, slashing at it with his knife. However, the blade slipped, leaving him stunned at the centipede's resilience. Using dragon vision, Yeon spotted a weak point under its head. The centipede leapt from the ceiling, and Yeon dodged, managing to strike its shell with full force, only to discover a second layer of armor. Before he could react, its tail struck him, slamming him into a wall. Blood spilled from Yeon's mouth as he realized the extent of his injuries, broken ribs, spinal fractures, and internal bleeding. Poison coursed through his veins, but notifications suddenly appeared, canceling his poison state in shock. Yeon regained his composure and grabbed his knife. The centipede attacked again, but Yeon gained the battle urge skill. Using newfound strength, he plunged his knife into its mouth, leapt back, and sent it crashing into a wall. Realizing an opening, he attacked its stomach, cutting it open. Blue blood splattered everywhere as Yeon relentlessly sliced it in half. Exhausted and in pain, Yeon collapsed. He noticed the centipede's lifeless eyes and received a notification promising a reward for defeating a strong enemy. Crawling forward, he grabbed moss and ate it, feeling its effects settle in his stomach. He then approached the carcass, cut out its heart, and bit into it, determined to survive. The scene shifted to Build, who demanded to know what had happened. The group sat silently, defeated, unsure of how to respond. Build stood with his hands on his hips. He thought they were strong. Frustration boiled inside him as he considered how someone had dared to harm his team despite knowing they were part of Arangdan. Turning to his subordinate, Build asked if the attacker had worn a white mask. The subordinate confirmed, and Build scratched his chin, deep in thought. His anger grew as he began walking away, his eyes burning with determination. He knew his next move. He had to find the masked man. The system notified Yeon that he had successfully defeated the red centipede points and discovered a new effect from consuming the centipede's heart and white moss together. His broken bones were repaired and strengthened, and his damaged muscles restored. The kill not only provided physical enhancements, Yeon exhaled deeply, realizing that the hidden corridor had given him both physical reinforcement and valuable rewards. He opened his system panel and noted that, despite only fighting one monster, the strength and energy recovery he gained far outweighed the rewards from other challenges. However, his low MP remained a disadvantage, reminding him he would need greater magic abilities as he progressed. Strengthening his body was crucial, but he also needed to harness the magic power of the dragon Calatus to reach his full potential. Reflecting on the battle, Yeon realized how his cool head skill helped him stay composed despite moments of intense suffering. Whether facing poisoning, burns, frostbite, or curses, his resistance skills offered a vital support system. Smiling, he noted his progress, improving 2 skills. Mask back on, Yeon turned his focus to a swarm of bats. The system soon confirmed his success. 147 monsters killed. Standing amidst the bat corpses, Yeon felt a strange familiarity with the process. He collected their fangs and claws, noticing traces of white moss mixed with the poisonous blood of the red centipede. Experimenting, he poured this mixture onto the claws and fangs, creating a fiery powder. The ground absorbed the mass, turning it into volatile red dust. Yeon realized this dust could cause a powerful explosion if ignited. Storing the dust in his bag, he prepared for his next challenge. Ahead lay a colony of blue nomadic ants, fiercely guarding their eggs. The ants ranged from 30 centimeters to 1 meter in size, with about 100 of them all protecting their queen. Yeon knew this fight wasn't going to be easy, but he knew he had no choice. The Empyrean dagger was in the next room. This legendary weapon, once wielded by the Vampire King, had a low rating number, 352, marking it as one of the best artifacts in the tower. Yeon couldn't back down. He decided to use a trick. Pulling the explosive powder from his bag, he threw a handful near the ants. As they scattered and examined the dust, Yeon lit a lighter and tossed it. The red powder ignited instantly, causing a massive explosion that killed 217 blue ants and burned 89 strong ones. Yeon grabbed his knife and finished off the remaining ants, noticing many of the destroyed ones were eggs or cubs. He sighed, knowing more adults were still around. As he prepared to move forward, a massive ant appeared. It was the queen ant. The system message confirmed the boss's arrival. The queen lunged, forcing Yeon to dodge. Scanning the area, he spotted a door. Yeon attacked, throwing 3 daggers and rushing forward to land cutting blows. He managed to sever one of the queen's legs, causing it to collapse. While the smaller ants swarmed the queen, Yeon ran to the door, opened it, and entered the temple of the vampire queen. At the center stood a statue of a vampire holding a blade. Yeon immediately recognized it as the vampiric dagger, a one-handed weapon in a unique category. Its description revealed it was the vampire queen's favorite tool, used to drain the blood of her enemies. Yeon smiled with satisfaction. The Batori's dagger was famous not just for its powerful impact but also for its special ability, Bloody Mark, which inflicted a bleeding effect on opponents. As Yeon reached out and removed the dagger from the statue, dark energy began to cover his hand. His expression twisted as he realized the dagger was choosing its master. If he failed, his spirit would be consumed entirely. Yeon gripped the dagger tightly, but his hand began to blacken. The system confirmed that the dagger's seal was breaking. Dark energy rose from the weapon, revealing the vampire queen's final safeguard. Her true abilities had been sealed within the blade to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. The system announced, seal broken. The true vampiric dagger emerged, now ranked 66th. Yeon's hand was engulfed in dark energy as the dagger's description appeared. Its hidden power allowed it to drain the opponent's life force, absorbing it into the wielder's soul. Ready to test his new abilities, he easily dispatched the remaining ants. One of them lunged at him, but Yeon leapt onto its back. He raised his marked hand, commanding it to absorb the ant's life force. The system confirmed, the mark has started absorbing energy, and the queen ant was utterly destroyed. The boss's lifeless, dried-up body lay on the ground as the remaining ants lost their will to fight. Nearby, Khan and his companion observed the aftermath. Khan's friend, yawning, dismissed the scene as a fluke, suggesting they leave. But Khan, intrigued, gestured to the dried corpses and speculated about the player responsible. Someone's been hunting non-stop here, raising their stats insanely fast, he noted. His companion agreed, remarking that players on the lower floors seemed to be getting stronger. Khan couldn't shake the thought. As the two searched the room, they noticed monsters fleeing. Exchanging glances, they wordlessly understood what needed to be done. The system chimed in again, brown salamander destroyed. Monsters defeated, 1,000. Yeon's reward was the completion of the Heart of Fire and Crest of Frost. Yeon looked at his hands as they started glowing with a strange light. A system message appeared, enhanced skeleton acquired. Checking his stats, he noticed a massive improvement. Thanks to Batory's vampiric dagger, he could now absorb energy from monsters faster than ever. His new ability, Enhanced Skeleton, combined the power of fire and water in his body. Fire filled his heart with energy, while water strengthened his resistance and recovery, making him tougher and harder to injure. Another message asked if he wanted to register his name in the updated training rankings. He declined, knowing it would draw unwanted attention from stronger players. Looking at the leaderboard, Yeon saw his rank had climbed to 281st place. It was a big improvement, but the gap between him and the top players like Adora, Fanti, and Khan was still massive. As he moved through the area, Yeon sensed he was being followed. Although he hadn't seen anyone during his battles, he was certain other players were close. He retrieved his dagger and prepared for a confrontation, suspecting they were the same individuals he had encountered while helping Yul. Spotting movement ahead, Yeon threw his dagger at one of them, hitting Khan's companion, who fell to the ground. Khan stepped in quickly, deflecting the dagger with a bold move. He turned to Yeon, his face tense, and asked what he was doing. Yeon's instincts told him these two were likely members of Arangdan. Yeon questioned if they were from Arangdan and demanded to know why they were following him. Khan pushed back, asking why Yeon thought it was fine to attack without warning. Yeon replied that being pursued without explanation left him no choice. Realizing their mistake, Khan and his partner lowered their heads and admitted they had acted foolishly. Khan and his partner exchanged glances, and Yeon repeated his question about why they were following him. Khan pointed at Yeon and suggested they team up, but his partner interrupted, saying this was getting awkward and needed to stop. Yeon, watching their interaction, thought they were ridiculous and started walking away. Khan grabbed Yeon's arm, asking where he was going and insisting the conversation wasn't over. He again offered to team up, but Yeon refused, saying he didn't know them or their intentions and had no interest in teamwork. Khan, clearly frustrated, asked if Yeon really didn't recognize him. When Yeon dismissed the idea, Khan couldn't believe it. He was supposedly the biggest star of the tutorial. Doyle, Khan's partner, clapped and commented on Khan's habit of showing off, then introduced both of them as Doyle and Khan. Hearing their names, Yeon realized they were ranked 3rd and 11th in the tutorial rankings. Doyle smiled and admitted their presence might seem suspicious since they should have already reached E or F levels. Before he could explain further, Yeon interrupted, saying he believed them. He had used the Dragon's Eye ability, which allowed him to sense a person's intentions through their aura. Bright auras indicated positive thoughts, while dark auras revealed negative intentions. Doyle and Khan's auras were bright, confirming their honesty. Yeon couldn't understand why they had come all the way from the previous zone. Doyle asked if Yeon was part of a clan or team. When Yeon said no, Doyle explained they needed a group of at least 3 or 4 players to obtain an artifact in Sector E. Yeon questioned why they couldn't find help in Sector E itself. Doyle explained that most players there had already joined teams, making it difficult to find capable allies. Yeon realized they must have noticed his abilities back in Block B when he fought Kane's group. When Yeon asked if the artifact was really worth it, Doyle admitted it was challenging to obtain, even with their ranks, but didn't elaborate further. Yeon guessed they might be after Hargan's crown, a treasure hidden in a lair his brother Arthea's team had once discovered. The lair's owner, the Lizard King Hargan, was notoriously powerful. Defeating him required immense effort, but the crown granted great rewards, increased leadership skills and more greatness points. Yeon didn't care much for the crown, but the memory of his brother's betrayal by his team came to mind. Trust was dangerous in a place like this. Doyle assured Yeon they wouldn't leave him in debt. If Yeon wanted something badly, they were willing to offer it as payment. Yeon agreed but demanded all rewards, except the artifact they needed. Doyle and his partner agreed but added that Yeon had to prove his skills. After sealing the deal, Yeon introduced himself as Kane, deciding to hide his real name. He received notifications confirming his solo clear of the Black Route in Block B, earning additional karma, a rare achievement. He advanced to Block C and completed it solo as well. In Block D, a goblin at his feet shouted a warning about strong humans approaching, intending to alert its commander. Before it could act, Yeon killed it without hesitation. Khan stood behind Yeon, uneasy as he watched him clean blood off his knife. Yeon opened the door to the next block, receiving a notification that he had cleared Block D solo and that all his stats were restored. As he walked through the grassy terrain of Block E, he shielded his face from the light. The tutorial was explained as being split into two main areas. In the inside, Blocks AD, players become aware of their skills and work on improving their weaknesses. In the outside, Blocks EG, players prove their skills and demonstrate their worth. As Yeon entered Block E, he received a notification that the trial had begun. He held a small blue sphere, called a token, in his hand. The notification explained that tokens were hidden throughout Block E and could be exchanged, transferred, or forcibly taken from other players. To complete the trial, one needed to collect 99 tokens. Yeon noticed Khan didn't seem particularly interested in the tokens, which made him wonder if Khan had already collected enough back in Block B. Turning to Khan and Doyle, Yeon stated it was time to act and suggested going after the hidden piece first. Khan warned it was far away and would take time to reach. It was noted that Block E was much larger and more complex than the previous blocks, with distinct ecosystems in every direction. To the east, sharp black cliffs rose high. To the west, there were vast plains with flowing rivers. The south featured low hills and a dense forest, while the northern part included a swampy area deep within. Each zone housed unique monsters, goblins, and kobolds on the forest outskirts, larger creatures like trolls and orcs deeper inside, and humanoid lizards in the swamp. The scene shifts to an armory where Bild receives a report from one of his subordinates. The subordinate informs him about the masked individual who had destroyed Kane's group and has now joined forces with Khan and Doyle. Bild is perplexed and frustrated, questioning why they weren't confined to Block E as expected. His subordinate explains that the details are unclear, but the trio hasn't been seen in Block E for some time. A witness claims to have spotted individuals resembling them in the waiting room of Block B. Bild's anger grows as he processes this information, realizing the subordinate had only recently uncovered these facts. The subordinate admits he hadn't considered the possibility of them being in the rookie zone but now believes it's undeniable. Bild rises and orders his subordinates to summon every member of the organization. He declares that they will pursue and deal with the masked individual together. The focus shifts to Yeon, who sits quietly by a fire, lost in thought. He reflects on how far he's come, how quickly time has passed, and how he's barely rested, always pushing forward. A noise snaps Yeon out of his thoughts, and he glances at Khan, who is soundly asleep. Observing Khan and Doyle, Yeon notices how different they are from other players. Their easy smiles and unwavering confidence set them apart, as if their skills and actions come naturally. Yeon recalls their dynamic during battle. Khan takes on physical combat while Doyle handles strategy and control, an efficient combination that allows them to anticipate enemy moves with precision. Their trust in one another is unmistakable, built over years of partnership. Watching them just made him think of his brother, who had been so full of light in life. As the night dragged on, Yeon's emotions got harder to ignore. Then, Khan suddenly got up and stretched, while Doyle rubbed his eyes. It wasn't even their turn for watch yet. Yeon wondered what was up. Khan complained about the noise, it was impossible to sleep. Annoyed, Khan grabbed his sword and decided to handle it himself. Without hesitation, Khan started cutting through the bushes, and blood poured out as he struck hidden enemies. A group of men had been hiding there, but now they were panicking and scattering, yelling that they couldn't believe they'd been found. Khan chased them down one by one. Meanwhile, Doyle sent a swarm of insects after the attackers. Yeon glanced at him and couldn't help but be impressed. The bugs swarmed the men, completely covering them as their screams echoed through the forest. Then Doyle noticed two men sneaking up on Yeon from behind, knives ready. Yeon was still sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, completely unaware. Doyle just smiled, knowing exactly what was about to go down. These guys were part of Frank's crew, some of the most active thieves in Block E. They made a living stealing tokens, artifacts, and anything valuable from other players. Some places even paid for live players, using them as workers, slaves, or test subjects. One of them went for Yeon's back, stabbing straight down, but hit nothing but wood. Yeon was already behind him in an instant, and with a single strike, took him out. The guy hit the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The others froze, then shouted in panic, demanding to know what he did to their leader. Yeon didn't hesitate, he sprinted toward them, cutting down two immediately. The third swung at him, but Yeon dodged and took him out with an upward kick. The rest of the crew saw what was happening and bolted, but Yeon wasn't about to let them go. He chased them down, one by one. By the time it was over, 21 bodies lay scattered around him. Yeon checked his stash, 81 tokens. Doyle raised an eyebrow but guessed most of the tokens had already been sold. With thousands of players passing through Block E, it was common to run into the same ones again and again. Yeon thought about it for a moment. Block E was simple, either you won, or you got crushed. Doyle told Yeon to gather as many tokens as possible since they were needed to buy karma items from the mysterious trader. He also mentioned that all the tokens now belonged to Yeon. Yeon looked confused, but Doyle explained that they hadn't paid him in advance on their deal, so he could consider this as payment. He tossed the bag of tokens into his backpack, thinking that Block East was the best place to collect more points. Besides, the monster he was after before even entering the tutorial had to be nearby. Yeon knew he had to increase his magic power and complete the succession process. Night had fallen, the group gathered wood for another fire. Khan mentioned that their next opponent was strong, so they needed to be ready. Suddenly, a bright light flashed across Yeon's face. Doyle had used control magic to start the fire with flame bugs, creatures that burn themselves when facing their natural enemy, taking their foe down with them. Yeon was impressed, realizing there was still much he didn't understand about the tower. The next day, deep in the forest, Yeon fought off lizard creatures, cutting them down with his knife. As he worked, he sliced open one of their heads. Khan noticed and asked why he was doing it. Yeon explained that the humanoid lizard's eyeball could be used to craft an artifact that provided a powerful buff. It was a small white ring with crystals, named Jaiji's Eyes by a giant with dozens of eyes and hundreds of hands. Yeon needed this artifact. Suddenly, Doyle spotted something on the ground and called Khan over. Someone had been there before them. They found footprints and blood among the bushes. Yeon crouched, touching the spot with his hand. He examined a bloody handprint and estimated that the fight had taken place recently, probably 5 or 6 hours ago. Yeon figured that the hidden areas in the tutorial were meant to boost player morale and encourage competition. Doyle asked if their attempt had failed. Yeon kept thinking about it. Since they had found this place, it wouldn't appear again in the current round. If other players had already reached Hargan's lair, then Khan and Doyle's chance at winning the crown was gone. He pointed out that all the tracks led in one direction, with none leading back. It didn't seem like the people who came here were searching for something. There were paw prints on the ground and signs that something had been dragged. Yeon realized that the humanoid lizards must have used bait to lure players into a trap. He stood up and explained that monsters weren't just prey for players, sometimes they were the ones hunting. This was their territory, and they knew it better than any player. Khan looked annoyed and muttered that these monsters were really starting to get on his nerves. Yeon kept his cool, but he noticed Doyle was furious. Then, just as suddenly, Doyle calmed down, looked at Yeon, and smiled. Khan reminded them that they hadn't discussed everything about this place yet. Yeon turned to the others as they explained that this was Hargan's lair. Since he was pretending not to know, he kept up the act and asked about it. Khan explained that they had fought plenty of humanoid lizards on their way here, but their king, the real challenge, lived inside. He and Doyle weren't strong enough to take him down. Yeon asked if his help would change the outcome. Khan hesitated before admitting that it would help, but it wouldn't make things easy. On top of the king, there was also a female boss inside the lair, and she was the real problem. Yeon asked what they should do. Narrowing his eyes, Khan explained his plan. He would lure the male outside the lair, Yeon would hold off the female inside, and while Khan kept the male busy, Yeon would attack the female. Doyle's job was simple: grab the crown from her head and they would all escape. Khan warned Yeon not to risk his life fighting the female since he wouldn't win. Yeon thought back to his time as a soldier in Africa, following orders on the battlefield. Now, he was more of a mercenary, working for rewards instead. At the entrance, several armed lizard men stood guard. As soon as they spotted the group, they started shouting. Another notification popped up: Hargan, the lizardman boss, had arrived. Covered in blood, he roared at them, furious that humans had dared to invade his territory. Hargan charged, growling, and stopped in front of them, his presence overwhelming. Yeon felt a level of tension he hadn't experienced before, not even when he first entered the tutorial. He locked eyes with Hargan, and the boss glared back, growing angrier. Suddenly, Hargan lunged at Yeon, swinging his sword and shouting for him to die. Before the strike could land, Khan stepped in, blocking the attack with his own sword. Hargan snarled at him to stay out of the way, but Khan just smiled and said he wasn't the same person anymore. The boss attacked again, but Khan dodged, making Hargan even angrier as he shouted for him to stop running and fight. The group had already entered the cave. As they walked, more lizardmen stood guard, but Yeon took them down instantly, throwing knives at their heads. Doyle watched in shock. Suddenly, screams for help echoed through the cave. Turning toward the sound, they saw a cage filled with people, their hands reaching through the bars, faces broken and desperate. Behind them, bones and blood covered the wall. Yeon stared at the scene, realizing this must be connected to the abduction marks they had seen at the entrance. This place wasn't just a prison, it was a food storage for the lizardmen. Yeon glanced at Doyle, who stood frozen, then turned toward him with a pained expression. Doyle suddenly shouted, asking if Yeon wasn't angry at all. Yeon, confused, asked why he should be. Yeon reminded him that they had come for the boss and that Khan was currently fighting Hargan alone. The longer they delayed, the greater the risk for him. Doyle fell silent, thinking over Yeon's words. Then, he slapped his own cheek to snap out of it, apologized, and agreed that Khan needed them. As Yeon looked at the bones scattered around, an idea formed in his mind. He told Doyle that they could adjust the plan. If it worked, they could save the prisoners too. Doyle's face lit up at the possibility. Yeon reached for his belt, mentioning that the flame bugs he had used last night would be crucial for what he had in mind. The lizards inside the cave were being beaten up. The female screams, "How dare these people come to them?" She was standing there furious and saying that they were here for her babies. In the nest were small dragons, red and blue in color. Yeon appeared and drew her attention. He was holding a small bag in his hand and asked her if she liked fireworks. The female asked what he was talking about and Yeon just threw the bag right at her kids. The female immediately ran towards them screaming. She was able to hit the bag with her bat, but it burst and there was red dust everywhere. The female Yeon looked ahead and thought about how it was the same powder he used on the ants, then called out to Doyle, who was ready to release all his insects. Doyle had set this female on fire thanks to his insects, and the lizard Tarragon was screaming in pain. She covered herself from the fire with her hands, but then her eyes fell on something that gave her the creeps. It's about Yeon standing with a knife at her kids' throats. He took them by the scruff of the neck and he just killed one of them. Blood was flying everywhere and the female was cursing and screaming at him. Yeon had already released the baby dragon's corpse, saying that since they considered humans to be mere livestock, and then he took another dragon and also put a knife to its throat, saying that they should understand that they themselves can become the same as. At that moment the female rushed to Yeon to save her children. She looked down at her feet and there were Doyle's insects, so it ignited all over and exploded in the same second. After a while the female was already lying dead and burned. The notification said that boss monster, Tarragon, queen of Lizardman, was defeated, so he got extra karma points. The Lizardman had been demoralized and the monsters were in panic at the lair. Yeon went to her corpse and said that it's always kill or be killed, and told Doyle to pick up the crown so they can meet Khan outside. Suddenly they heard a heart-rending scream, so they turned around to find out that it was Hargan, the lizard, moaning about his wife and children. The boss began to squeeze the dead body, saying that he would avenge them, and suddenly there was blood everywhere. Notifications showed up. Boss monster Hargan had used the predator skill, so he had successfully absorbed Tarragon's power, after which he used transformation and entered the second phase. His body instantly grew the same as his power. Hargan started to attack and an aura appeared around him that shot fire in all directions. Yeon hid from it behind the rocks for a while as everything flew apart and realized that if he slowed down even for a second he would die. Yeon was considering his next move when a green butterfly flew up to him, asking if he could hear it. Realizing it was Doyle, he confirmed that he had a plan but needed to get the message to Khan. Meanwhile, Hargan roared, demanding they face him or he would come to them. In response, Yeon stepped out from behind the rocks, motioning for the boss to come closer. With knives in hand, he braced himself as Hargan charged, shouting for his death. Activating the dragon's eye, Yeon spotted a weak point on Hargan's sword. As the boss swung, Yeon blocked at the precise spot, redirecting the blow. The impact sent wind blasting through the cave, and Yeon took the chance to signal his team to act. Khan slashed at the boss while Doyle raised his hand, igniting the monster in flames. Observing their coordinated attacks, Yeon could see Hargan weakening. But the monster, enraged, vowed revenge for Tarragon. Hargan gripped his sword with both hands, preparing another attack, but Yeon was faster. Slashing at the lizard man, he pressed forward as the others joined in, forcing Hargan into a desperate struggle. Yeon seized the moment, slipping under the monster's feet and delivering several swift blows. Hargan, staggering, tried to counter, but Yeon was already behind him. Grabbing the back of his head, he saw the terror in the boss's eyes. A system message confirmed that Yeon's vampiric dagger skill had increased, absorbing vitality and energy. Hargan screamed as flames consumed him. The system then announced their victory, and each team member received karma points based on their contribution. Yeon, having absorbed Hargan's core skill, gained a new ability, Heat Wave. However, due to his low proficiency in the Vampiric dagger, the skill adapted into Flame Infusion, a D-rank ability allowing him to shape fire at will. Realizing he likely wouldn't reach Heat Wave anytime soon, Yeon still considered this a major success. Clutching his head, he swayed slightly, prompting Kon and Doyle to rush to him. Kon steadied him, asking if he was alright. Yeon assured them he was fine, just having trouble moving. Doyle insisted he sit down, worried about hidden injuries. Yeon brushed off their concern, telling them to focus on something more urgent, the people trapped in the cages. Doyle regained his focus, and they moved quickly to free the prisoners. Grateful voices filled the cave, and one man, in particular, expressed his deep thanks. Kon and Doyle stood nearby, smiling, saying it wasn't a big deal, they had simply done what was necessary. The man then hesitated before asking if Kon was actually Foxytail. Kon scratched the back of his head, clearly wanting to keep that part a secret. Kon casually waved his hand and downplayed his role in Hargan's defeat, saying he had only helped. Their eyes shifted to Yeon, who sat quietly nearby. Despite the victory, some of the freed prisoners seemed uneasy. One of them hesitated before recalling something from earlier. When Doyle first found them, Yeon had told him to leave them behind. The man admitted it might sound bold, but he found it hard to see Yeon as human. Kon, irritated by the comment, shot him a sharp look. The man flinched, confused. Kon made it clear that the conversation was over. Whatever people thought of Yeon, he was the one who saved them. Kon then demanded to know if the man still planned to keep talking nonsense. The man looked down, his hands trembling. The crowd around them turned toward Yeon, murmuring that the man should apologize not to them, but to the person who had saved him. The man approached Yeon, who remained sitting quietly, and bent down to apologize. He acknowledged that he had behaved wrongly and hoped Yeon could forgive his rude words. While he was apologizing, the man felt betrayed because his team didn't support his decision. One of them came over, said sorry, and asked if he needed tokens or items. The man almost got angry, asking why they cared now, but then he saw the other man looking at Kon and Doyle, who were talking about the loot. The other man suggested they just take the prizes from them. He said they didn't need to hurt them, just take what they had and leave, because they couldn't survive outside without supplies. Kon held out his hand, reminding them of their agreement to take Hargan's crown. Yeon agreed, and Kon expressed that he had always thought Yeon was a good guy. Kon gestured toward the weapons, telling Yeon to take the blue sword of scales, a rare relic. Yeon, who mostly used short blades, found it unsuitable for him. The sword was a two-handed weapon ranked D, and it carried the power of fire, with high durability capable of destroying anything. Yeon then checked the list of rare items in Hargan's lair. Among them was Karksuna's dagger, a one-handed D-class weapon. Yeon realized this dagger would be perfect for him to continue his training. Doyle looked up in surprise and saw a blue portal. A voice came from it. The voice then praised Yeon for being quick-witted and added that a merchant had arrived. The merchant, holding his head, said he just wanted to surprise them. As he landed on the ground, Doyle and Kon asked if Yeon knew him. The merchant said loudly that their relationship was special, and he hadn't seen them in a while. Kon believed the mysterious trader befriended only two types, those ranked in the tutorial's top 10, and those he personally acknowledged, which seemed to be the case with Kane. Yeon, however, offered to sell him the ownership of the lair and the blue scale scimitar for 150 tokens. The merchant assumed Yeon wanted to haggle and smiled, but Yeon immediately raised the price to 160 tokens. The merchant hesitated and started to speak, but before he could finish, Yeon increased the price to 180 tokens. The merchant tried to speak again, but Yeon interrupted, raising it to 200 tokens. The merchant smiled and started to speak again, but Yeon raised the price to 300 tokens, saying the quicker the merchant bought it, the better. Yeon warned that if the merchant didn't agree, he would be left with nothing, and the lair, along with all the crystals, would disappear. Hargan's lair was an area known for its high-grade magic stones, which were crucial for storing and transmitting magical power, much like conductors on Earth. The higher the stone's purity, the more efficient it was at transmitting power, which made them incredibly valuable, especially those with over 70% purity. But Yeon immediately raised the price to 400 tokens. Hearing the price of 400 tokens, the merchant reluctantly agreed but asked Yeon to stop raising the price. Yeon, however, set the final price at 405 tokens, adding the extra 5 as compensation for wasting his time. The system message confirmed that the blue scale scimitar and the ownership of Hargan's lair had been sold for 405 tokens. As Yeon checked his tokens, his total was now 698. Yeon then turned to the frustrated merchant, telling him to wait, as he needed one more thing. The merchant, fearing he was about to be scammed, asked what Yeon wanted. Yeon pointed to his mask and said he needed a new one because the current one was broken. The merchant offered a mask for 4 strength, but Yeon refused, indicating he wanted the new mask as part of the deal. When the merchant refused, Yeon threatened to cancel the entire transaction. Annoyed, the merchant snapped his fingers, claiming he had noticed Yeon's mask issue and had something for him. The system message then confirmed that Yeon had received a white ghost mask, rated E and classified as a helmet. A mask associated with several spirits, it gives a strange look and hides the face. Yeon put on the white ghost mask and immediately noticed how it felt stuck to his face, though he appreciated that it wasn't easy to remove. It also offered protection from various injuries. The merchant, before disappearing into it, looked at him and commented that he was brave to sell the stones, especially knowing the situation on the other side. Yeon, confused, asked the merchant to clarify, but the merchant simply said that he had forgotten, then vanished through the portal. As Yeon thought about the magic stones, he realized their importance as the foundation for high-quality artifacts. The merchant's quick agreement to purchase them, despite the high price, suggested a sudden increase in demand. Yeon's mind began to race, pondering the cause. The most likely explanation was a war brewing, which would require more high-quality artifacts. He also recognized that the rivalry between clans and rankers within the tower would only intensify because of it. Khan broke Yeon's thoughts, asking what his next move would be. Yeon had originally ranked 150th, but his position had risen to 52. He glanced at the top ranks and noticed the gap to first place was still considerable. He knew he had more to do before moving forward, especially with the boss in Blocky being one of the most powerful figures hidden within the training process. Khan asked Yeon what he was going to do next. Doyle offered to join him in Khan, but Yeon said he was not going to Block F soon, that he had his own business, and that he was not interested in being part of a team. Khan told Doyle that they couldn't force Yeon to join, and also told Yeon to stay with them at least until they left the swamp. Yeon then asked Khan what would happen to the people they'd saved from the swamp. Khan replied that they should have taken them out of the area for their own safety. Yeon, indifferent, said he didn't have any obligation to help them further, but Khan, showing a sense of compassion, insisted that they still had a duty to protect them. One of the players reached Doyle and asked him for some food. Doyle, feeling guilty, handed out a bag of food, apologizing for not sharing sooner. Yeon couldn't shake the feeling that many of the people around them were waiting for an opportunity to betray them. At that moment, the man who had received the food approached Ethan, handing him the bag of food. Ethan, who had been observing the group with a smile, saw all of them as weak and pathetic. Ethan's real intentions were far darker. He planned to steal tokens and artifacts from Doyle and Khan and, ultimately, kill them all, including Yeon, in order to climb up the rankings. He studied Yeon, sensing something cold and monstrous about him. Yeon's aura made him uneasy, but he dismissed it, too focused on his own plans. As they walked, one of the former prisoners asked if they could take a break. Some of the weaker individuals were struggling to keep up. Khan, slightly irritated, considered giving them a couple of tokens to let them go. He was starting to find them more of an annoyance than a help. The prisoner smiled and acknowledged the group's exhaustion, asking for a short rest. Ethan, still smiling off to the side, was plotting. He knew the scavengers were hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and kill Khan. He couldn't believe how easily Khan and the others were falling for the act. However, Ethan suddenly noticed Yeon's gaze on him. Yeon saw through him. Ethan was too obvious, and his intentions were clear. Yeon took his knife and swiftly killed him. The others quickly surrounded Ethan's lifeless body, and Yeon, without hesitation, drew his knife again. He knew that those who would attack him were most likely among them. His instincts had proven true. By activating his passive sense skill, he had picked up on Ethan's strange behavior, which had been a dead giveaway. Yeon sensed the presence of the scavengers group hiding nearby. Without hesitation, he decided to strike first. However, Khan, still confused by his actions, stepped in front of him and asked what he was doing. Yeon, annoyed by Khan's hesitation, called him a fool and told him to step aside if he couldn't think straight. Khan looked around, realizing they were surrounded by a group of people, all smiling menacingly and readying their weapons. He and Doyle pressed their backs together, prepared to defend themselves. Khan, still holding his sword, observed the scene with growing confusion, unsure of what they were up against. Yeon, already rushing forward, saw the situation for what it was. These people, he realized, were responsible for creating the human farms, capturing players, and using them as decoys to bring others into traps. The scavengers would then take the artifacts from the players, leaving them to die, most likely after the monsters killed them. Yeon knew the truth about the dungeon and the fate of those trapped in it, and he couldn't afford to let such people live. Meanwhile, deep inside the forest, a group of scavengers was discussing their spoils. They had found an artifact, a crystal glowing with a blue light. The man looked at the crystal and mentioned his intent to take the blood dragon sword and dragon slayer, weapons he had requested. They were communicating through stones, and Zwei, one of the scavengers, noticed that Ethan was taking too long. He ordered Seebson to call him, but the stone stopped shining. When Zwei attempted to contact Noon, he learned that Noon had been killed. Realizing they were under attack, Zwei began scanning the area. Though he was ranked 15th among the top players and believed he could handle players from the top 10, he shouted out to the attacker, but before he could react, he saw his comrade, severely wounded and covered in blood, stumbling towards him. The dying man whispered, "Ghost," before collapsing. Zwei, in shock, turned to face his attacker and saw Yeon standing behind him. Back in the camp, Khan couldn't help but wonder what Arangdan was doing while human farming continued unchecked. Yeon appeared from the shadows, swiftly taking down one of the scavengers with a precise stab. Doyle and Khan joined him in the fight, taking out the remaining scavengers with ease. The surviving men collapsed to their knees, begging for forgiveness, claiming they had been forced into their actions by Ainz. Khan, unyielding and cold, asked them how they were any different from Hargan, the monster who had consumed their comrades. With a harsh tone, Khan called them complete idiots before he plunged his sword into the man's chest. Khan's resolve was unshakable. As a sword fighter born into a prestigious family, he had rejected his father's influence and had carved his own path to power. He had no patience for excuses or mercy, and he certainly wouldn't be moved by pleas from those who had chosen to betray their comrades. Meanwhile, Yeon walked over to where his companions, Doyle and Khan, were sitting on a nearby rock. He observed their quiet demeanor and thought about how they were still in the process of rescuing those trapped by the Lizard King. This event would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Khan, unable to comprehend Yeon's detached demeanor, turned to him and asked why he was so calm in the face of such brutality. Yeon, as emotionless as ever, replied that he was used to it. Khan questioned what kind of life he had lived to become this way. He looked at the people around Yeon, wondering if they too were like him. Yeon responded. Yeon, in turn, began to reflect on Khan's words. It was obvious to him that he could never trust anyone in this world. Those around him seemed to believe in building relationships based on trust, but Yeon knew that such bonds were fragile and would inevitably lead to betrayal. As far as he was concerned, they were merely his partners, tools in a game where trust meant nothing. Their ideals were too different from his own, and Yeon understood that he couldn't remain with them for long. Their goodness made them vulnerable, and that vulnerability would eventually bring them harm. With that, Yeon stood up and declared that he would leave alone. Doyle jumped to his feet, rushing to stop him. She asked why Khan wouldn't stop him from leaving, but Khan, his face twisted in anger, told her firmly to sit down. Doyle, confused and frustrated, was about to argue further, but Khan interrupted, explaining that letting Yeon go was for the best. Their gaze shifted to the sword sticking out of the ground nearby, a reminder of the violent confrontation that had just taken place. Khan muttered under his breath, "Those threads, they're Arangdan's signature." Jeong-woo, one of the 10 largest clans in the tower, had been backing the establishment of Arangdan to monitor the tutorial. At the time, many other clans had been skeptical of Jeong-woo's intentions. It was widely speculated that Arangdan was merely a cover-up for Jeong-woo's true aim, to take control of the scavengers, the players operating in the periphery of the tutorial. Doyle recalled that Arangdan had been officially announced shortly after Arthea had purged the scavengers from the tutorial. Khan wasn't keen on dragging Kane into this mess. Now it was clear to Doyle why Khan had allowed Yeon to leave. They had no need to involve him in these complicated affairs. Khan told Doyle to head to a place called Vigrider, while he would go to meet Bild. The real reason they were after Hargan's crown became evident. They were in search of Digrider, a hidden item in the tutorial. Doyle smiled, his lips curling into a knowing grin. "I also want to meet that bastard Bild," he said with a hint of amusement in his voice. Meanwhile, Yeon, walking away from them, glanced back. He had a rough idea of where Khan and Doyle were headed and could already guess their plans. Yeon looked into the distance, knowing he still had unfinished business to the east. He couldn't ignore it anymore, as he knew that if he didn't act now, he would never get another opportunity. The scene shifted, and we were transported to a new setting where 2 men stood near a set of weapons. One of them was Bild, who coldly inquired if Group 2 had been destroyed. Bild, with an unreadable expression, ordered him to call Team 1. The informant was caught off guard. Team 1 was composed of the most elite players, trained and honed by Jeong-woo. Bild revealed that Team 2 had been defeated by the trio of players known as Bloodsword, Foxy Tail, and the Masked. He told the informant that he would personally join the team. As Bild's thoughts drifted, he realized his group was close to collecting all the necessary sacrifices, and no more obstacles could stand in their way. Bild needed to eliminate them without leaving a trace behind. Suddenly, someone shouted that they were being invaded and everything started falling apart. Another man ran inside and said that they had come. Suddenly, rocks flew in his direction. He looked ahead and saw Khan and Doyle enter through the opening. The fog shattered, and Khan clenched his hand into a fist and started shouting Build's name. He began emitting a bright energy and repelling other people. Build said that he was bored and wanted to have fun against the son of the Iron Lion. They both crossed swords. We are transported to the village of the orcs. Yeon appeared and cut off the heads of 2 of them. The other orc hesitated and was about to attack him with his sword, but Yeon pinned him to the wall and was about to kill him. However, the orc started begging for mercy. Yeon said he would only ask him if he had seen a cottage around there. The frightened monster said that he had never seen it himself, but his friends told him that when they went to hunting, they saw a strange house. Yeon realized that this must have been the location of an informant who knew where to find the hidden boss, Akasha's snake. This boss appeared at a certain time, in a certain place, under certain conditions. Yeon went to a small house near the edge of the cliff. He stepped closer and knocked on the door, then excused himself. Suddenly, someone came up behind him and asked who he was. Yeon turned around and saw an elf holding a dead animal on his shoulder. He had a displeased look, and behind him was a bow and arrows. Galliard discontentedly approached Yeon, who introduced himself. The elf frowned and replied that he didn't care, and rudely asked again what Yeon was doing there. Yeon said that he had learned about Galliard from a friend of his. He was searching for Undine's goblet. The elf asked Yeon who had told him about him, and Yeon said it was Braham, an old friend of Galliard's and Yeong-woo's second master. Galliard opened the door and invited Yeon in. Inside, Galliard placed the dead animal on a table and told Yeon about the Undine's goblet, an artifact capable of bringing the snake to the surface once. The elf was the only one who knew how to create it, as it was the monster's favorite food. Yeon was told that in order to get the goblet he needed to catch Galliard 5 times out of 10 attempts. However, Galliard's speed made this a difficult task. If he managed, he would gain access to Shuunpa, a technique that made the user move faster and silently, perfect for battle. The test began, with Galliard hiding and Yeon needing to find him and touch him. Galliard imposed a handicap, not using his hands. Yeon activated his dragon's eyes, seeing a green aura around him. Following the aura, he spotted Galliard and tried to strike, but Galliard dodged. Yeon realized Shuunpa had a flaw. Though the elf moved fast, he left traces behind that Yeon could use to track him. After a few tries, Yeon managed to surprise Galliard and catch him from behind. A notification confirmed Yeon had completed the challenge and earned the right to receive the Undine's goblet, along with the chance to earn extra rewards. Galliard was impressed, admitting he hadn't expected Yeon to do so well. He handed Yeon a small bag with no lock or protection. Inside, Yeon found the Undine's goblet, described as a crystal orb filled with Akasha. This powerful substance was dangerous if not handled correctly. Galliard warned Yeon to be careful, as a leak of the substance could cause a disaster. Galliard smiled and mentioned that the tutorial had some amazing players this time, including himself. Galliard said there were 2 players, a brother and sister, who had both earned the Undine's goblet and Shuunpa. Galliard then asked what Yeon was doing here, and questioned why he needed the Undine's goblet. Yeon replied that he was after Akasha's snake, which surprised the elf. Galliard seemed puzzled and disappointed, telling Yeon that the snake had already been killed by the siblings, Adora and Fanti. Yeon went to the spot where the snake was meant to be summoned. The place was full of cracks, and there was blood everywhere. He wondered how the siblings knew about this place, since only Arthea had known about it. Based on the traces, Yeon realized it had been about a week since the snake had last appeared. Then, he saw something that shocked him, a huge snake corpse, covered in blood. Yeon observed Akasha's remains, noting that they had taken only the most essential parts, poison, and energy. He knelt and wondered how the siblings had been able to capture such a powerful creature. Yeon was left wondering if their strength was beyond anything he could imagine. He removed his mask, sat on some rocks, and thought about his next move. Yeon was ranked 40th and figured he needed to push hard to break into first place, though even with his best efforts, he might only reach 8th or 11th. He also realized he needed Naiden to complete the succession process. As he stared at the snake's head, he noticed bloody footprints and wondered who else could have been involved. Upon examining them, he confirmed they were orcs. Yeon felt the need to investigate further. A system message appeared, showing that there were 150 hours, 43 minutes, and 11 seconds remaining in the tutorial. A warrior in gray armor with a scar on his cheek and black hair appears in front of us. This is Bane, ranked 6th in the tutorial. In front of him stands another warrior in the same armor, who bows and says that this is exactly what Build ordered, to gather the entire first group. Bane says they should send someone else. The other warrior responds that this is a special order from Mr. Build, and anyone who refuses to follow it will be expelled from the clan. The knight confirms it and explains that Team 1 was ordered to move collectively. He also adds that Build promised to give all of Arangdan's tokens to anyone who brings him the target. Bane thinks to himself that all the tokens will go to one person, and this is his chance to rise in the ranks quickly. Bane realizes that if the second group was destroyed, it means their tokens were taken, which could help him rise above 5th place. Meanwhile, Yeon makes his way through the forest, following the bloodstains. A system message appears, indicating his Shuunpa skill has increased by 1.2%. Yeon enters one of the caves and wonders what it's like. He starts walking forward and another system message informs him that he has entered Akasha's snake tunnel. Inside, the cave is lit by candles hanging from the ceiling. Yeon wonders what the orcs are doing there, suspecting they are carrying the snake's brain. Suddenly, Yeon is startled by the noise of a drum. He looks and sees orcs worshipping Akasha's brain, which is lying on a pedestal. An orc shaman, holding a staff, shouts that we humans killed their god, and now the snake will gather all its anger and be reborn to punish the murderer. Then, Akasha's brain starts to smoke, and a moment later, it bursts into light. Suddenly, a snake leaps out of the brain. A system notification appears, hidden quest/resurrection ceremony. The snake's body is created from a part of substance and spirit. If enough energy is given to Akasha, she could be resurrected at any time. The orcs are trying to bring her back to life, and Yeon must stop it before the snake grows larger. The reward is unknown. Yeon wonders where he can get more food for the snake. In the village of the lizard men, they discuss keeping the snake's death a secret, or else the orcs will come after them. Suddenly, Yeon appears and stabs one of them in the head. He also kills an orc and sets them together. He thinks that if they see this, they'll assume they died fighting. Yeon then uses his fire flame technique. Yeon's next victims are goblins and werewolves, leading a revolt among all the monsters against the orcs, seeking revenge for the death of their leaders. System notifications inform Yeon that by causing conflict among the surrounding monsters, he will receive additional karma. Additionally, the other notification was a sudden quest/monster rush. None of the monsters had invaded each other's territories before. Yeon thinks the board is already set, he just needs to sit back and watch the show. Meanwhile, the Arangdan group is arguing among themselves about who is the strongest. But fortunately, Dyke steps in, telling them they're acting like children and need to focus on the mission and complete it quickly. Suddenly, they begin to feel and hear something. The ground shakes as hundreds of footsteps make the earth tremble. A stampede of monsters is rushing toward them, yelling for them to get out of the way, or they will be killed. In the end, the monsters collide with the humans, killing them. In a village, the orc chief is informed that the lizardmen have started the war and crossed the northern wall. The chief curses them but then realizes that they could use them as sacrifices. The chief tells his subordinate to inform the orc shaman who is in the ritual. At the wall, the orc army is trying to hold its ground. One of the monsters grabs a large rock and smashes the wall. Once it's down, a goblin and an orc face off, shouting their names, and the battle begins. Yeon uses Shuunpa to move quickly toward Akasha's snake lair. He thinks the battle must have already begun, with the two chiefs, Cranum and Ferric, likely fighting. Their fighting levels are on par with the lizard king Hargan, so the battle will only last a few minutes. But Yeon needs to get the snake out, and when he enters, he finds that she has fully resurrected and started devouring everything in her path. The orcs scream that their god is angry and punishing them. Due to her hunger, the snake escapes the cave, and Yeon analyzes that she is heading toward the battlefield. He is also sure that this place holds something hidden. Facing the snake is so difficult that it shouldn't even be part of the tutorial. This must mean there's a reason she's here. After searching, he finds a place that's entirely frozen, and there, he discovers a mythical humanoid root, a rarity among divine roots. If consumed, one's magical power will increase depending on how much is consumed. Yeon didn't expect to find the mythical humanoid root there, but he did. The root was about 300 years old, though it would reach its optimal consumption age at 500 years. This explained why the snake was guarding it, but unfortunately for the snake, Yeon planned to consume it. The root tried to escape, dodging Yeon's daggers several times. But in the end, he caught it and consumed it. His abilities started increasing, particularly his magic, and his awakening progression resumed at 42.9%. His body transitioned from the immature dragon's body to the half-dragon's body, and he gained the magic circulation skill. Now, Yeon could control magic like the ancient dragons. Yeon could sense the magic flowing throughout his body. The higher his mastery, the more magic he would be able to control, including mana streams. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, humans were bloodied and dead after a brutal fight with the orcs. Bane survived, only to find that Team 1 had been wiped out. He also realized that the monsters were heading toward Yeon's location, likely because of a hidden piece. Feeling powerless, Bane decided he would intercept and steal whatever Kane had obtained to catch up to Fanti and Adora. After consuming the root, Yeon checked his new magic stats, realizing he now had more options for using magic. While he was leaving the place, he found a necklace, full of memories. When he opened it, he saw a photo of Galliard and his family. Maybe this was the reason Galliard was after the snake. Yeon saved the necklace to his pocket and put on his mask, thinking it was time to hunt. On the battlefield, the two chiefs were still fighting when suddenly, Akasha emerged from the depths. The sight of the snake terrified everyone as it began devouring everything in its path while spraying poison. One goblin jumped onto Akasha and struck it in the head. Yeon, observing from a distance, waited for his moment. Only a small fraction of the monsters remained alive. Both chiefs were at the front but were close to dying. Yeon leapt onto the snake using his new abilities, positioning himself on its back and activating the Devour skill. His stats began to rise, and after defeating the snake, he gained several rewards, including 3,000 tokens for completing all the quests. Yeon retrieved Akasha's core, which had grown in size after the consumption of the monsters. He consumed the core as well, causing his body's progress to resume, but it also filled him with venom that spread throughout his body. The conversion would take a lot of energy and time to complete. When the monsters saw Yeon, they couldn't believe their eyes. His gaze resembled that of a predator. The orc chief realized Yeon was responsible for everything and charged at him, but Yeon easily decapitated him. He gained additional karma for defeating Vampiric, the orc king. Yeon did the same to Cranum, the Goblin King. Most of the monsters fled in terror, and those who stayed to fight had their life essence absorbed, making Yeon even stronger. Yeon was exhausted, but he noticed someone watching him from behind a rock. It was Bane, who had come to steal Yeon's power. However, before he could make a move, an arrow hit him in the head. It was Galliard, who had come out of curiosity after seeing the chaotic state of the forest. Despite his exhaustion from the awakening process, Yeon had enough strength to give the elf the family pendant before he passed out. Notifications popped up, indicating that his body transformation had been successful. His trait was now gold-plated body, and 94% of the Akashic essence and the poison had been converted. However, his awakening progress had stalled at 92.5%, and it couldn't continue. Yeon was now in the incomplete dragon's body phase. As he sat up, he saw Galliard approaching. The elf told him not to push himself and to rest until his senses returned to normal. Galliard had helped him because Yeon's methods for strengthening his body had been flawed. Galliard explained that the root was difficult to digest, and on top of that, Yeon had consumed the snake's core without allowing his body to adjust first. Yeon could have lost control or even exploded. Yeon thought that since his body had a contract with a dragon, it wouldn't be necessary. But Galliard didn't know that, so he had used Undine's glass to ease Yeon's body. Yeon thanked him, saying he would return the favor, but Galliard also thanked him for the pendant. Yeon recalled that Undine's divine water was one of Galliard's secret abilities and wondered if Undine's glass had been created for human use and if it could help him absorb magic more efficiently. As Yeon was stretching outside the cabin, the elf noticed him and told him he needed to rest more. However, Yeon used Chuunpa and quickly disappeared, surprising Galliard. For the first time, Yeon felt what it was like to use magic, and he definitely noticed the difference. After practicing for a while, he remembered that it was time to check the rewards for the completed quests. Yeon had received a black bracelet, which belonged to the same person who owned the Akashic snake, though the name was unknown. The bracelet granted the skill Soul Reaper, allowing him to take the souls of victims. These souls had no memory or power, only resentment. He also gained the skill Black Blade's Edge, which allowed him to convert the souls into magic with dark properties. As Yeon extended his arm, black smoke began to rise from the bracelet, surrounding him and turning his eyes black, giving him the ability to see the souls of the dead. He looked ahead and saw the souls of his victims and they became defensive when they saw him, but Yeon didn't waste time. He began harvesting their souls and imbuing his dagger with them. After gathering some of the souls and using blazing fire, an explosion occurred, creating a large crater. Yeon wanted to test the skill further, so he gathered all the souls in the area and stored them for a future explosive attack. Yeon received the title of Monster Hunter for defeating many monsters. He also got the Eye of the Goblin King, which holds the resentment of the Goblin King and helps against curses and poisons, as well as the monster's 5-colored gem, which holds the resentment of 5 different monster races and grants their abilities. Yeon met with Galliard and mentioned he was heading to Block F. The elf noticed that Yeon reminded him of someone from his past, his twin brother, and wondered if they were related. Galliard gave Yeon a sword, the one from his last opponent, and asked how Yeon had made Arangdan so angry. He warned him that Arangdan's headquarters was in Block F and that Yeon should be careful. Yeon, surprised, didn't understand what he meant, and Galliard explained that the sword belonged to Arung's group. Yeon started reflecting, thinking back on what he knew. He had thought Arung's group was just a scavenger group. Then, Arung's group appeared, along with the human farm and the disappearance of Khan and Doyle. Those two had discovered what Arung was up to and had gone to confront them. But it wouldn't be easy because Arung's group was allied with the powerful Azure Sword Clan, one of the top 8 clans in the tower. Yeon started to consider saving them and remembered his brother's last words in his journal. "Brother, you've always been my hero. I hope that my pain doesn't change what kind of a person you are." 8 swords had pierced his brother, 3 from the king's, 1 from his love, and the last from someone he thought was a friend. Yeon decided to leave, and Galliard asked if he had decided to go to war and if he needed help, but Yeon said he didn't want to involve the elf in his fight since it wasn't his battle. Galliard wished him luck and said goodbye. Yeon still didn't understand why the Azure Sword Clan was building human farms. Everything seemed suspicious. If he could figure out what was behind it, he could use it against the clan. The 8 clans were responsible for his brother's and his group's deaths, and the Azure Sword Clan's sword had pierced his brother's heart. Yeon checked the tutorial and saw it would end in less than 4 days. He planned to take down Arangdan in 3 days and finish the tutorial with whatever time remained. He wanted to attack relentlessly until they panicked, and then he would finish them off. Meanwhile, at Arangdan's headquarters, Bild was asking for Yeon's location, as Yeon had caused major losses to the group by reducing them by 70% through a monster stampede. He also had problems with the scavenger's destruction and some Arangdan members. His years of work were crumbling, and he needed to find a solution before the island found out and punished him. The only solution he saw was to use that. He went to a dungeon, where Khan and Doyle were chained up and injured. Bild told them they would soon become test subjects for a stone, an incomplete stone that was the reason the Arangdan and Scavenger clans had united to kill players. Just as Bild and his subordinates heard something in the distance, Khan lamented dragging Doyle into this, when suddenly, a loud noise shook the ground. One of his subordinates ran in and shouted that there was an intruder. Outside, Yeon effortlessly defeated everyone who opposed him. Using Goblin's feet and Eye of the Goblin King, he harvested the souls of the Arangdan warriors who were fleeing from him in fear. From above, Bild ordered Yeon to stop, shouting at him and releasing his presence, which Yeon recognized. Yeon suddenly remembered in shock the swords that had killed his brother. The last sword belonged to Leonti, and one of his friends was Bild, who had laughed at Yeon-woo while Leonti killed him. Yeon's fury erupted, and he vowed to make this his first gift to his brother. Bild ordered one of his subordinates to send a message to the island that they were dealing with an intruder, but before the message could be sent, Yeon killed the messenger and taunted Bild to come down and fight him. The battle began, with both attacking and dodging. While fighting, Yeon recalled how Leonti, after stabbing his brother, joined the Azure Sword Clan. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became, especially toward Bild, who was doing everything to stop his attacks. Bild couldn't believe Yeon's level of power as Yeon unleashed a spell at full force, hitting Bild and severing his arm. Just as Yeon was about to finish him off, Bild's dogs blocked his path. Yeon defeated them effortlessly, but some of them hadn't obeyed Bild, so he had to use a skill to control them and escape toward the stone. Khan and Doyle, still chained up, were trying to figure out what was happening outside. They wondered where Kane might be, likely in Block G. Suddenly, the dungeon door opened, and they were stunned to see Yeon come to free them. Khan and Doyle, grateful, were exhausted and in pain, and they knew they would be a burden to Kane again. Khan started to say they would deal with the floor's dogs, but Yeon stopped him, saying he'd already taken care of everyone except for Bild. The 3 of them went down to a basement that could have been where Bild went, and it reeked of rot, an underground human farm. Yeon saw the souls of sacrificed players and asked them if they wanted to help him. The souls seemed to agree, and Yeon told them there was one condition. Bild, desperate, entered the room where the stone was. This stone, he thought, would help him rise in rank and become a subordinate of the king. Build swallowed the stone, having been told by Leonti that it would boost his magical power. If the body couldn't handle it, the person would explode, but that wouldn't happen with a nearly complete stone. Build grew frustrated when he felt no change, but then Yeon appeared behind him, taunting him. Build yelled at Yeon, asking why he was following him, claiming he'd done nothing wrong. Yeon took off his mask, dropping it, and Build, shocked, leaned on a table, muttering that it was impossible for Yeon-woo to be there. Yeon began torturing Build for information and learned many things. After his brother's death and Arthea's departure, the tower underwent changes under the rule of the 8-clan alliance. The surviving members of Arthea went their separate ways. Sitting on a dying Build, who begged for death, Yeon said he always did the opposite of what was asked of him and reminded him that his friends were waiting. With a snap of his fingers, Yeon summoned the souls, empowered by the black bracelet. These souls swore loyalty to Yeon in exchange for Build, so they could take their revenge. Yeon left the room, leaving Build still begging for death. The fortification burned and collapsed, and Yeon found Build's body. He tried to examine the stone but couldn't identify it. Still, he picked it up, and it began to glow brightly as smoke poured from it and entered Yeon's heart. The stone settled in his heart before it was completed, but it had no effect on him. Yeon then met up with Khan and Doyle. Khan, now exhausted, sat down and asked Yeon what his next move was. Yeon said he was heading to Block G. Khan tossed him a bag of rewards they had collected, explaining that they were planning to quit the tutorial. Yeon was surprised, and the guys explained they couldn't continue in their current state and would try the tutorial again later. After thinking for a moment, Yeon asked Doyle if the tutorial could be attempted again after abandoning it. Doyle confirmed, surprised Yeon didn't already know. Yeon realized that all this time he had been giving it his all because he believed he only had one shot. The journal didn't mention anything about that, and he had stressed over nothing, but at least he had met some good players. Khan told him he preferred that Yeon keep the rewards, so he could defeat Fanti and Adora, who he might encounter in Block G. Yeon asked what Fanti and Adora looked like, and Khan explained that they were monsters. He had tried to beat them several times but had failed. Yeon agreed to face them, and Khan placed a crown on his head. They both burst into laughter. Yeon only had 2 days, and the hidden piece required for Hargan's crown was in the basement, in the nest of the thorn mole. Yeon started digging, fighting all the thorn moles on his way until he reached the boss monster. After some difficulty, he managed to defeat it. Embedded in a stone, shining brightly, was the Vigrid sword. Yeon pulled it out, unaware that the tower's administrator was watching from a room, amused by his greed but entertained by his progress. Yeon entered Block G, climbing a long staircase suspended in the sky that led to a floating land. This was where the top players were. Once on solid ground, he suddenly felt a powerful surge of energy coming from a place surrounded by people watching in fear and anxiety. At the center stood a tall man dressed in white, who was knocking down everyone he faced with a single shout. Behind him stood another person. Yeon carefully examined them. One had a tooth sticking out, purple hair, and a horn growing from his temples. They were Fanti and Adora. Here's the first part of a manhwa summary, just to give you a sneak peek into the story. If you're curious about what happens next, subscribe and stay tuned for the next part. Drop a comment if you're into this story or want to see more.